that remains the same. And this also remained the case in plenty of proto-feudal up to late stage feudal societies as well, which did have centralized forms of currency, which Marx even recognized as capital. It's just not a capitalism. Obviously that wasn't the predominant mode of production.
Yeah, I will say here that also the primitive accumulation, what is the accumulation referring to? Because it's been described, it's the sort of the origin of what capital is and how the class distinctions began.
Well, every system is the origin of the next system, but he obviously sees a distinct break with capitalism and previous forms of
but if you go back to
society.
That's precisely what we're saying, that there are different forms of capital.
But if you talk about hunter-gathering societies, right, where a lot of this stuff is shared in a more, I guess you would say, communistic way. As these economies begin to develop and you start to get towards feudalism, essentially what is happening is you have a person who has control over what you could call capital, which would be it's not necessarily money, but it's resources, and that's where you have basically the haves and the have-nots beginning to form. I mean, it is primitive capital in the sense, because if you're talking about primitive accumulation, it's the primitive accumulation of what? I think you have to address that.
It's a feudal system. It's not a capitalist system, no.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question. You just dodged it with saying nothing.
No, I didn't. I don't think that it exists in the same way.
Primitive accumulation of what?
I don't think it's capital.
Okay, what is it then?
Wealth?
Okay, dude, come on. Have some self-awareness when you say when you look in the camera.
I do. Capital is wealth that's used to generate more wealth through the exploitation of wage labor, which didn't exist under feudalism. That's Marx's specific definition. So you're just showing that you haven't done one-on-one Marx when you're saying this. You're trying to be condescending, but you understand wage labor is the fundamental.
You're being pedantic.
I'm not being pedantic.
Marx you're being semantic.
Huge. No, so now you're arguing that Marx sees no difference between a serf and a worker. That's not true.
How am I arguing that?
Because you're refusing.
You're not arguing it. So then there's a huge difference between a serf and a worker, right? And if that's the case, then there's a difference between capital, which is earned through exploitation of wage labor, and say, for example, tribute or taxing your serfs. It's different. There's no surplus value, right?
Okay, there was an accumulation of resources, an accumulation of the wealth that was brought on the backs of workers, which, they're not workers in the sense that they're selling their labor on the market for money. But still, there is a worker who is producing goods and services and producing resources and producing wealth in that system still.
Well, but they're not a worker. That's the thing. They are generating feudal property. They're also generating agricultural products. But that is not the same thing as capital. Capital purely does emerge from the extraction of wage labor.
It's the exact same, but primitive capital. I mean, the primitive.
So you guys keep using the word primitive capital. That's not what Marx said. Just a reminder, that word's not used. It's primitive accumulation.
Okay, and what does he describe primitive?
Accumulation of wealth, not capital, because capital is unique to capitalism. Primitive accumulation, the methods are violence, dispossession, coercion. Capital is acquired through economic exploitation through surplus value. Primitive accumulation is to establish the capitalist mode of production, whereas capital reproduces and expands capitalism.
Yes, but this is the origin of capital.
Everything's related to each other. Yeah, I mean, you can say feudalism is the origin of capital, but it's not feudalism. Or excuse me, it's not capital, it's feudalism.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that feudalism is capitalism.
Okay,
and I would say that that's why it would be referred to as capital because it would not be the same as capital. Otherwise, we wouldn't make.
Why would you use the same word? You see,
for primitive capital.
Marx didn't call it primitive capital because it's not capital. It's a different system. You could call it primitive accumulation of wealth.
But the concept is not that different.
For Marx, it was.
Yes, that's why there's a primitive distinction placed in front of it.
He didn't use the word primitive capital. You were using that.
I understand. Primitive accumulation of what? Wealth. Okay, what is
Yeah,
wealth?
which is
Wealth
not
is
capital.
I'm
Wealth
sorry,
is
but, like-
not capital. In Marxist
Like, okay.
framework, the term capital has a specific meaning tied to the capitalist mode of production, where wealth is used to generate surplus value through the exploitation of wage labor. Capital for Marx is not just wealth, but wealth in a particular form. It's value that's used, and this is the part that goes back to my original point about it being a cancer outside people. Capital has to exist as value that's used to create more value through the process of production and exchange. So it has to get bigger, or it's not going into the market. So it exists outside of human interest. If it's going into the market, it has to get bigger. Got to find a way to make more profit, or else it's not going to go out. And that's why you have a system that's outside of control.
The point that we're making is like there are incentive structures which humans do create by virtue of like various like socially engineered like frameworks, such as like, for example, the European wars of religion, or like for example, like disincentivization for like mass scale like research within like a capitalistic framework. The large reasons why these weren't pursued was like due to a variance of like sociological factors, which Marx himself even acknowledges. For example, like in the 1688 Glorious Revolution, for example, which was a rebellion of planters in the mercantile class, which were all had capital systems of their own. They were engaging in capital with their own markets, with their own consumer
Mercantilism is
bases,
not capitalism.
right? Yeah, no, it's not, because it wouldn't be considered capitalism because it's not the predominant system. It's just it's a capitalistic system underneath that of a feudal like system of land tenure. Yes.
Right. And I
Obviously.
understand there were hybrid systems. I'm not sitting here being that pedantic, but you have to understand if you go right into the middle of the feudal era, you can't go and like squint your eyes and be like, this is capitalism. It's not.
Well, yeah, but the point is that those capital systems have like been in place for a very long time and have had overarching sociological incentives put on them to disexpand, expand, etc. Or
You guys are
redirect
calling
their
them
focus.
capital systems, but you can only do that as non-Marxist because Marx would never call those capital systems.
I, by the way, am not disagreeing
what
with
would
you that capital exists outside of the strictly like human relations. Like I'm not disagreeing with that. I just find it to be a bit semantic that we're gonna sit here and split hairs about primitive capital versus just calling it wealth, which you use to generate more wealth.
But under feudalism, it wasn't wealth to generate more wealth. It was a different system.
Yes, it was a different system. The system did not entail, or the system was not defined by wealth creating wealth, but it was wealth that created more wealth, because through wealth you could fund essentially what would be considered, like you could say, like, you could most describe it in modern day as being imperialism through warring kingdoms and things like that.
That's contradictory to the role of the
It doesn't act
lords.
the same way. It doesn't have the same role because it was not capital under capitalism. And I understand that, but if Marx is saying that capital is dead labor, that vampire like only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. I mean, that still exists within the feudalist system. It's just not existing in the exact same way that it would exist under capitalism.
Not
What
following.
about like? Well,
The development and increased concentration of capital as a class is going to mean like the dissolution of the king and the removal of all those old ways that you're talking about. So that situation you're talking about would be in the rapid transformation, like transformative process of becoming actual capitalism. And you can take a snapshot of Polaroid and be like, that's actually capitalism inside of feudalism. But it's like, no, if you really had that dominant
But I'm not
class,
saying that.
what are you saying?
I'm saying that when we refer to primitive capital, we're essentially referring to resources extracted through labor, which is functioning in a different way.
When you refer to primitive capital, you understand you're doing like an intellectual like disservice to Marx, because he came up with this term to describe something specific in an economic system he's trying to describe, and now you're talking about a different economic system and using that same word when he specifically meant for it to be about the difference with how this system is versus the old system. He talked about primitive accumulation.
Speaking of
but you say of wealth.
Primitive accumulation of wealth, not capital.
It's also important to realize
then we're just splitting hairs and
No.
We're not, because again, you guys still aren't grasping what capital is.
No, I understand what capital is. I just think that you can relate a primitive version of capital to a feudalist system.
In feudalism, the king could just tell you that you're not allowed to own more land, or he could say you're not allowed to have a certain amount of wealth from your serfs, and that's just the shit. That's the way it was. Capital didn't have the dominant. You couldn't say this is my surplus value. It was the king's, right?
Okay,
due to the very
But
feudal
democracy can
relations.
also tell you those things, right?
Well, no, because what you're misinterpreting the property relations of feudal property and capital. Capital is purely a property relation of capitalism as a system, while under feudalism, the relations of feudal property were the concentration of wealth to the king, to the queen, right, to the monarch, right, and the lords just represented that production and that producing of wealth. It wasn't that they were using wealth to create more wealth. It was the fact that there was just a concentration of the accumulation of wealth.
Of capital.
So under capitalism, right?
They were splitting hair. It's fine.
Well, no, because under
There's
capitalism,
a reason why like historians talk about mercantilist cultures, and they don't call them capitalists because they weren't capitalists, right?
Yeah.
They developed wealth,
Right.
they concentrated wealth, but they were not capitalists. And that same process functioned within feudalism, where it was non-capitalist. And
Sure, but then under mercantile capitalism, you were still having merchants use wealth to create wealth. This was just through buying and trading.
No, you still so literally the core philosophy of mercantilism was a zero-sum game. It literally emphasized one like you said, one nation's gains, another's loss, but it's still totally different than just money to make money. It wasn't like based on speculation.
money didn't even exist.
Right.
Money as we know it didn't even exist, right? And it's important to understand that Marx even lays this out in Capital. What is the role of money? And the role of money is pretty much to reflect the arbitration and the value that is being produced through the input and output of the market. And there's more to it than that. But generally speaking, unless you have a complete marketized system, you will not actually have money to represent any sort of value. And therefore, mercantilism not having that market system, it can't actually produce money.
It does, though? What are you talking about? Are you saying that mercantilism isn't like a form of capitalism?
It's not.
It's entirely different.
What?
Okay, in what way?
No.
Mercantilism focuses on national wealth and power. Capitalism focuses on private wealth and profit. Mercantilism has strong regulatory framework and like large amounts of protection. Mercantilist trade is protectionist in nature at its very heart, whereas capitalist trade is
doesn't matter. If you just
trade.
if you have a very high tariff policy and you have a few like government subsidized like corporations and like colonial expansionist ventures, doesn't make you not capitalist. The mode of production predominantly within those societies. Well,
right, but you would still look at the first thing, the focus, which is private wealth and power, or private wealth and profit, which regardless of what you said, America uses tariffs and protectionist measures to enforce national monopolies and stuff like that, but it's all for private wealth and profit. It's not for national wealth and power. Economic goal of mercantilism, accumulation. Economic goal of capitalism, expansion and reinvestment. Again, reinvestment, like you put out C, it comes back as C prime. It's always got to come back bigger.
Well, but there you're just like basically describing like a fundamentally different character between like competing like proto-nation states. Like the main reason why like capitalism formed in the way it did was like through new realms of like diplomacy and those measures. For example,
I think that
that's just an expansion of an overall market into like common markets with like reduced tariffs. That's not a different system. That's just like a policy change.
I mean, I would say more so that it was sort of it's a transition between feudalism and capitalism, but also I think you're looking at it more so on it being that you are a person who can like it is the beginning of like private ownership of things, and that's sort of what you're focusing on. I do think that they're right about this being a marked difference between mercantile, what we could commonly refer to as mercantile capitalism, and capitalism as we see it today.
Yeah, capitalism like can change forms. For example, it still changes forms to this day. It doesn't make like those previous systems not still also capitalist.
The common aspects of capitalism as described by Marx are still extremely relevant to the capitalism that we see today. Like, of course, it shifts and changes as markets and technology and international relations change, but that doesn't change the core fundamental aspect of what capitalism is, which is ultimately private wealth and Sorry, I lost my train of thought right at the end. Apologies.
Yeah, you're just saying that, for example, like the government, these governments, for example, have like less like the Bank of Scotland crash, for example, is like the largest like reason as to like we point to that as like the transition between mercantilist modes after that in 1806, and then after that in like the British Empire that became like a lot more capitalistic from that point on, because you had the rise of like private banking institutions and such, and various privately funded ventures, even within the colonial sphere. It wasn't provided by like some sort of like state bank. The source of a lot of those things, and fiscal revenues obviously were like a lot higher. More of the Night's Watchman state arrived, but like that's still capitalism at the end of the day.
I mean, if we're gonna say private ownership over the means of production is capitalism, then I guess that is driven
by forces in a consumer market economy, which it was. So that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess. I don't know. I see more so their end of the argument here with mercantilism specifically, whereas I was more on your side with talking about primitive capital, which I can agree to disagree on.
Okay.
Sorry, it's not like that. That's not something that I would ever focus on when talking to a worker, right? Like primitive capital.
Oh, I'm not talking to workers. We're just having a discussion here.
Oh, no, I know. I'm just saying that, like, it's one of those things where it's like, I may have some opinions about it, but, like, it's not even top 50 things that I care about within Marxism.
I was a bit confused before, because earlier in this conversation, I'm very confused, honestly, because Gabe Mill, you initially, like, proposed that, like, for example, capital is, like, a system that infinitely expands in and of itself, and, like, will commodify, like, infinitesimally to, like, expand its own, like, its own like internal systemic like organization. Basically, that's all that capital does is like a system, and it doesn't really have any influence outside of like you said like human elements, for example. Like, could you define human elements in this instance?
Sorry, what's your question?
What are like the human elements that you believe that do not like influence like capital or capital modes of production? For example,
imagine you and I have completely different personalities. Like, I care about the environment, you don't. I care about workers, you don't. All that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, the market only cares about who profits. It doesn't care about that shit. That's what I mean.
Okay, the market only profits. All right, but do you think that there are any incentives?
No, the market's not who profits. Yep. We profit based on how the market responds.
Yeah, how the market responds, and if it does successfully, then we profit. Yeah, absolutely. So wait, do you believe that like no like sociological influences can happen to influence the like nature of capital itself, how it's practiced, for example?
But all that does is increase. And like, for example, in America, like America has sociological influences that increase the cost of the American worker, and it's led to the American worker being like incredibly unattractive to hire compared to like the Indian worker or the Chinese worker or the Malaysian or Singaporean worker. You can have you can have social forces that influence things like costs or how much we're paying to make sure people are safe or the environment's safe and all that shit. But that's going to, because of the nature of capitalism is anarchic and there's no like world force governing that shit, you're going to have those kinds of enforcements in certain places and not in others. And that's just going to allow capital to use the differential to exploit.
It's also important to realize that, yes, there are social forces in which can affect capital, but it's more over the system as a whole, right? It affects the sociological understanding that we have. That is the material relation, understanding that the system affects how we respond to it.
And if everyone in this channel owns like a Walmart, and my Walmart unionizes, my costs are going to be through the roof compared to yours. Our profits are going to suck. They're going to close my Walmart. In fact, they close them before they unionize. And that's not about, so that's what they do, exactly. So it doesn't matter. We could all love it. That's what I'm saying. It's totally outside human control. I could love paying workers a shit ton of money, or I could be a Nazi and want to pay them nothing. It doesn't matter. The profit's just a profit. And the firm that figures out how to do it the best is going to be the one that wins. It doesn't matter if, they're nice guys or mean guys or any of that shit.
Okay, I think maybe
a firm that has high prices is going to put itself out of business, right?
I think the easier way of describing this may be more so saying that the system itself is existing outside of human interaction because it is incentivizing.
No, that's idealist.
Yeah, it's not the system.
That's idealist. No.
Capitalism itself, but capitalism itself exists it exists, right? That is material, that it exists, and it incentivizes people to extract as much profits as possible.
But it doesn't exist outside of human interaction.
Capital exists. So that C that has to become C prime, that's what exists outside people. I could put that capital, we all put capital out into the market. It exists with its own mind in the sense of if I let my guys unionize or I'm paying American workers, my capital is going to come back not even as prime, it's going to come back as less money than I invested in. You guys all have your workers in China or Malaysia, your capital is coming back as capital prime. Now next time we have to go invest, I have to close my company. That's how it works.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter about
that's what I was describing, but I was called idealist. I'm saying that the system, no, but it's not idealist because the system itself exists, right? And the incentives of the system exist outside of, like, as you were saying, like, sure, capital itself, the actual like wealth that is accumulated through the system of capitalism does exist outside of the system, and the profits exist without, like, whatever, never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to be called an idealist for describing what you're describing in simpler terms.
I won't call you an idealist. Say it if you want, whatever.
I essentially just what I'm saying is that the human will of the individual does not exist under capitalism because you have to actually like go within the incentive of the market. So like
it exists, it's just not profitable.
Yes, but that's what you're saying, and that's what I'm saying.
But what's powerful about it is it allows people that aren't in that position of power to like imagine that it could change that way. Like, oh, if I was the boss, I would just pay people more. If I was the boss, I would hire American workers.
What I'm arguing.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, that's what I'm arguing. Is essentially that like the sort of ethics that exist within like humanity are disincentivized throughout the system, and so you're going to end up doing worse because of that. Because of what you were saying, well, like moving labor to a country where you can get cheaper labor, if it's manufacturing, or just like union busting and paying your like paying lawyers thousands and thousands of dollars to union bust is ultimately like a long-term goal to get more profits.
Well, it's cost savings. That cost you're paying is less than you'd pay if everyone unionized.
Well, it's actually
closing the firm.
Yeah, but on top of that, the profits that you would get with a non-unionized business versus a unionized business, even if you are hiring union busters and paying them thousands of dollars per day, like they were doing with Amazon, it looks worse to your shareholders. And you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders.
What looks worse? You're saying if you have to hire union people?
Well, no. So, like, if your business unionizes, it looks worse to shareholders.
Oh, yes.
And
well, so that's why most businesses and corporations
more money than you would busting unions than you would actually like if you paid them a reasonable price that the union was asking.
Well, that's exactly why most corporations and businesses they finance co-ops, right? Is because they don't have to worry about the cooperative wanting to take a larger pay raise, right? They don't have to worry about the cooperative going against their corporatist interest. It's going to feed into it.
How does a co-op relate to that? I'm just curious.
Well, easy because
they already take profits or something. They're already profit sharing.
Well, yeah, they are profit sharing. It's essentially unionizing for the petit bourgeois, right? And you have.
I just don't know a lot of companies that have co-ops.
No, there's not a lot right now. There's not a lot right now because there's not an incentive for them. But as unions start to become less incentivized, which they already are becoming less incentivized. I mean, we're already dealing in America right now. They're trying to ban unions. But once this happens, right, what are they going to turn to? Though the workers are going to have to go somewhere. They're going to look for somewhere to get organized, to try to feel like they're making an influence or that they're going to get something out of it. But in reality, they're only going to be profiting. They're only going to be getting something in return if they already have a pool of capital to their disposal. And that's only going to be through the collective shares of the cooperative itself.
Right.
I would see this actually being something that most corporations would turn to, because they wouldn't have to spend as much money or as much as they do on union busters.
Yeah. I mean, like,
I mean, I disagree. Like, if you have workers that are existing in the co-op, then they are
nigger.
It's not just profit sharing. It's also
Thank you.
like you have people who are workers themselves, like owning the company together. So I guess I would want you to expand on what you mean exactly by co-ops, like being cheaper than union busting.
Well, so that's the thing, right? Is if the goal of corporations and businesses is to invest in union busting, that way they can combat the interest of the workers, right? They wouldn't have to spend as much money investing in that when they have a cooperative that is going to be leaning in their interest.
But they're going to be profit sharing way more with the people that cooperatively own a business together than workers unionizing and demanding wages.
Sure, but this is the very essence of what Marx describes as bourgeois socialism, right? And this is why cooperatives are actually fundamental to the to decentralization of monopoly capital. Is because they actually proceed to allow that kind of hyper focus of smaller transactions, smaller relations of collective shares. And so now they can privatize as a cooperative, and they don't have to worry about the workers really having an influence over the pool of capital in which they control.
They would have less influence over the capital if they owned the capital?
The workers wouldn't be able to influence the relations of the cooperative. So let's take Walmart as an example, right? We were talking about Walmart earlier.
Well, no. I can you provide an example that would be relevant where like there's a cooperative that is ultimately owned by a larger corporation?
Well, I don't know of any cooperatives off the top of my head, but I can give you a scenario.
How widespread
What
is
is your
this?
point?
I don't know of any co-ops.
No,
I don't understand how worker co-ops is better for capital owners than unions. Because if that was true, then instead of spending time busting unions, wouldn't they just be cooperative, like making cooperatives out of workplaces? If that was the case,
Make workers.
making cooperations out of workplaces.
No, because that's not what a cooperative does.
Can you provide an example of this happening in the real world?
I mean, it happened in Italy. It happened in Italy.
Rather than just saying it?
No, it did happen. It happened in Italy. In the 1930s, it happened in Italy when under the rule of fascism, right? We saw that many companies and businesses were being co-opted. That way, we could see a centralization of monopoly accumulation.
You're saying co-ops lead to monopoly?
Well, essentially, yeah. They're a byproduct.
So
workers that work in a company together that own
cooperatives are not proletarian. You're mistakenly trying to say that cooperatives are for the workers. They're really not.
Okay, you're not providing an actual like
Maybe just be
analysis.
clear. I don't even think he wants you to argue better. Maybe just like be clear about what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just having trouble following because from what I understand, let me just say what I understand of a worker cooperative is that it is the workers who own the company all have a share of the company.
Like
they
extra.
all profit share in the company.
You get your wages, but you also get like, I don't know, dividend or something extra.
Like you get a piece of the profits,
Yeah.
and you have a larger say within that workplace.
So,
It is my understanding of a worker co-op.
That's mine too. Unless like Richard D. Wolf, he's a huge like co-op guy, right? His website's like democracyatwork.org, and he's like a big Marxist, right?
Yeah, no, I understand.
That's what I know about.
I understand Richard. I understand Richard.
And I'm a Stalinist. So I'm more of like a vanguard party guy. But hey, if workers want to like get,
I'm also a Marxist-Leninist.
Oh,
I would say worker cooperative would be preferable to no worker.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if they want to do it, well, I'm not gonna.
The issue that we run into, right? The issue that we run into is when workers join cooperatives, they are actually changing their class position from being a proletarian, from being a worker, to now holding property relations, right? And those
I see that argument as well.
Yes. So that's the issue, is that they're no longer workers at the point that they join the cooperative, and they actually start assessing in that that transaction.
I think it's more complex than that, though, right? Like in some companies, you get a 401k, and I think that's been argued that that's a form of profit sharing as well, and kind of gives the worker like, I don't want to overthrow the company. I have a 401k, right? I have like an interest in the long term of the company, and
right,
like,
but
it's supposed to like align the interests of you with like the ownership. But I would also say like it's pretty obvious that like 401ks aren't like equally distributed among the workforce.
No.
Probably like the people that make a lot of money have big 401ks. The temporary workers and the people that are at the bottom, like, they're not getting huge 401ks probably. So,
and this is what happens. This is what happens when you.
I can see reactionary.
I understand why you would say that there's like a class change that happens there, but is this not what we would like to happen? Is that the workers own the means of production? I mean, like, were the workers under the dictatorship of the proletariat?
Right, but cooperatives wouldn't.
Were they no longer workers?
Well, it isn't just workers; it's proletarians.
So this is the thing. This is the thing. This is the thing. They only work in that way if you actually have an established dictatorship of the proletariat. If you don't, if you're wanting to create cooperatives under capitalism, that's only going to move your class position from being a worker to now being a petty bourgeois. Yes.
Correct, yeah. I get the argument. I see both sides, and it is kind of one of those things of like, in China, it's okay for this to happen. In America, it's bad for this to happen because like China has a communist party or a vanguard party, whatnot. Like in China, I want to see them do co-ops and profit share, right? Like in America,
and this is because what ends up happening under the cooperative.
What you're saying is like, let's not like, okay, maybe I'm totally missing the point here, but it feels like what you're saying is like not that like when you improve the material conditions of workers and allow them to engage in a workplace where there is workplace democracy, that you are now actually changing your class and you're no longer part of the proletariat, and that we're no longer advocating for you, and that like you would rather them slave away at something like Amazon so that there could be a revolution in the future rather than working
because again this actually comes down to the reform or revolution question, and we already know that there is no way that you can fundamentally reform your way into a dictatorship of the proletariat. It is not within the interest of the ruling class.
But that doesn't mean I wouldn't advocate for better conditions for workers.
So this is the thing that most, I feel like a lot of leftists or a lot of Marxists tend to forget, is that concessions are not gains. Concessions are a way to make you as the worker passive. They're going to mitigate your revolutionary potential as much as they possibly can. That way you don't recognize or actually exceed the conditions or situations that are going to prevail towards revolutionary sentiment.
Okay, but like you can also argue that showing a working class that when they are politically active and fighting that they get any concessions, like you could say that like having like a really active workforce with maybe you have like high unionization and they're going against like the capital within the government to get sort of concessions, and you can say, hey, these are nothing but concessions, but like that can show the political power of the working class, could it not?
No, because the working class doesn't actually hold any power over capital. And because
the working class holds unrealized power as the working class, right? Because they are much larger, they're a much larger force. They don't have power right now because what we're doing is we're sitting here talking about trans people using bathrooms instead of like, why the fuck does 60% of America live?
So the power in which the working class holds is revolutionary potential. Again, it is the ability of becoming class conscious and class struggle, addressing class struggle.
Political wins within the working class not allow for political consciousness to grow, knowing that if the workers band together to get something, that there is actual power that they hold. And then taking that, and instead of saying like, we're going to do electoralism over and over again, saying, now look at the power that we wield, look at what we made them concede, we can do this and so much more.
Yes, but this is not the historical way that it's prevailed, and that's what you have to realize. It's not
the material conditions in the historical context. We will never be we will never be Tsarist Russia. We will never be.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Even in capitalist Germany, when the ruling class made concessions to the workers, when Rosa Luxemburg was trying to revolt and build up an actual movement, and concessions were made, it was mitigated. The revolution failed. And this is what happens time and time again. When concessions are made, we no longer have that revolutionary potential. It is mitigated.
Okay, so then are we accelerationists? Should we just vote to make sure that the most fascist party takes over in order for us to have our conditions worsen and worsen so that we boost our revolutionary potential?
Capitalism in decay is the period of capitalism when revolution is most successful. And yes, it sounds horrible in sight, but it is the way in which revolution most occurs in the most successful manner.
I disagree with Birthright a little bit, but I mean, like, I don't think Marxism is necessarily about wanting the material conditions to change. It's just about like being conscious that if they did change, you'd have more revolutionary potential.
And that's the other thing too, right? That's the other thing too, is that you're not actually going to be able to forcefully revolt, okay? It's not up to you when the revolution occurs. It is due to the conditions themselves paving the way for the revolution.
But there is a huge responsibility of Marxists in those changing material conditions that allow for revolutionary conditions to occur to continue to educate the working class.
So this is where when you want to look at every revolution that has occurred, Marxist revolution that has occurred historically in third world nations, this is where this doesn't apply. Because you can say that, yeah, they have a responsibility to do so, but they had a responsibility to do so because they weren't even developed capitalist nations yet. They were underdeveloped feudal societies.
Yeah, that's why I lean a little bit more towards third worldism.
So here's the most successful, or not most successful. Here's the closest revolution in history that we've had to something that is more capitalistic, and this is mainly because it wasn't necessarily feudalism, but it was more of an agrarian, an agricultural economic system. Cuba. They had more of an agricultural society that was based around industrial agriculturalism, right? Or yeah. And due to those conditions in Cuba, we actually saw more revolutionary potential happen due to the conditions of the country itself failing. The system and the country itself was actually in decay when Castro had his successful revolution.
Well, yes, of course, and I agree with you that like conditions need to conditions need to be bad for people to, I guess, get to the point where they are revolutionary. But I also think that, like, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily hope for conditions that are worse to, like, hope that there's a better, because, like, I don't know, like, if we're looking at America, like, I think, like, accelerationism is not going to bring us towards revolution. It's only going to bring us deeper and deeper into fascism.
Two quick responses though. Mm-hmm. So I don't hope for things to get necessarily worse in America, but if it's true that America is based on like exploiting the rest of the world, I'd like for that to stop. And that might mean that America's not doing so well. So in that sense, right, like maybe I would like to see certain things dissolved in America, but I'm not sitting here just like doing witchcraft hoping there's a downfall or some shit.
Right, and
it'd be cool if like that stopped.
And I can address the acceleration scenario, and we can discuss that. But I do want to address first, generally speaking about America, right? If we are talking about what is our responsibility as a Marxist, because right now we can't force the revolution to occur. That's just immaterial. That's a misinterpretation of materialism. But what the responsibility that we do have as Marxists is throwing ideas out there, is getting local movements or organizations set up. We can definitely make and produce and spread theory and conversations to make it easier for people to become radicalized. But it's only through discussions in which we truly have a responsibility to engage with right now. The actual class struggle will come as things do accelerate. And this is why I want to kind of go into accelerationism, because what accelerationism will do, and Gavin is kind of right on this, it will cause certain things to go astray with the current American hegemony. The empire as we know it, the imperialism as we know it, has reached its claws around the world, so expanding so far that there's really not a whole lot of concrete stuff holding the nation together. And I say the nation as the empire, as the state itself. The deep state is in a state of being, and a kind of flux where it is in rapid decay.
Can I make a super quick response also? Because I'm also, I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Birthright's saying. I think the danger of, when we say like we don't want these people to be petty bourgeois, it's not like we don't want them to have fun or have money or anything like that. The issue with that class is that when things get worse, there's a tendency to want to hunker down and blame, right, immigrants or something like that, as opposed to have like an international proletarian like consciousness, or like, hey, let's group up as like a collective, and not just a collective like of white people, right, but like a real collective of working people, and let's make demands. And I think that America is such a petty bourgeois, or whatever you want to call it, settler colonial society. We are so used to having our in-groups and out-groups. And when we're going to collectivize, it's like, well, I'm just going to do it with the white people, right? Like or even worse, right now you see America, the thinking is that the country's not doing so well. So what? We turn to the right. We go down the Trump road, right? We're not thinking, let's go to the left. The tendency is to want to hold on, right? To desperately grasp what I have, instead of look at my brothers and try to rise up. And that's the petty bourgeois mentality. And I think you can, your material reality does dictate kind of like how you feel generally. It doesn't have to. So obviously you could have a different situation possibly, but it's kind of unlikely in America. And that's why I think the prediction is like, if the undoing of the American empire happened, I don't think Americans would see it.
It's also, oh my god.
Unmute him. I think he was about to say something.
No. Oh fuck.
Mr. Gabe Noel.
Yeah.
So why would you go left if the right is bringing back manufacturing and tightening labor markets and raising the wages?
The right doesn't actually represent that, though. Hold on. The right doesn't actually represent that, though. It's just like the pro wrestling optics. Trump said he's going to bring back manufacturing, and then he says, Elon, let's import, 3 million Indian guys. Like, let's make sure these guys have no citizenship. We're going to get them to where we can kick them out if they get fired, but they're going to be slaving away in America. We're going to exploit them at the highest level and fuck the American workers on that. So there is no actual, that's just optics, that's just words. So yeah, people will go along with it because they're saying it and because the Democrats are actually brain dead.
And to further like go on to that H-1B sort of conversation.
Yeah.
It is also the fact that like there is a time period in which they are not allowed to not have a job or else they'll be deported. And so
that's what I'm saying. If you get fired, you get kicked out of the country. So these are desperate workers.
Yeah,
so
you're able to, and even though they're high skilled workers, they are able to then be further exploited.
Yeah, why would you
and work extra hours? And,
and
if you are bringing these people in, and you're bringing extra, and then you
guys are going to work 6 times harder than Americans.
Yeah, and you're
and 6 times cheaper.
Yeah, and you're exploiting them. And making them work extra hours, they're never going to say anything about it because their citizenship or their status within America is tied to their labor. And so what happens is, as you are able to bring more and more H-1B visa workers on, as you are under these actual conditions, you're able to then displace the actual working force because the more people you bring on that are H-1B visa holders, the more you can make them work extra, the less that you need other labor.
Trump advertises nativism, and he'll probably like free you if you're like a white supremacist or if you like kill someone and you're brown or whatever. But at the same time, he's going to give all these companies just free reign to make trillions of dollars, right? Because that's where the real power is at, right? So culturally, he's going to do his little thing and like whatever, like let Elon go up and do a Nazi flag or whatever. But really, it's about
So Trump is gonna hire ICE to kick out Pedro and Alejandro. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is gonna get Rajput and
that's not even gonna happen. Biden did more deportations than Trump. Trump just does it more like visually. So Trump sent ICE up into the interior of the country to do deportations. Biden would kick them out at the border, and they actually kicked more people out at the border under the Biden administration.
I do feel like even though the volume of deportations was larger under Biden than under Trump during their first term, I feel like Trump during this term is going to be a bit more bold since he's a bit more emboldened by his criminal immunity now. And I think this shows by him just outright trying to end birthright citizenship, just straight up ordering states to disregard it, which would mean violating the Constitution, and I feel like he's going to become a lot more. I think he's going to become a lot more vulgar within it than the previous administration, and I think he's going to exceed his first term, and
he is going to become more vulgar with it. That's the thing.
We'll have to see. I'm just saying, based on what happened, he already had one term, and there was less deportations than Biden.
Right. But
and again, I mean, I'm obviously not a Trump guy. Like,
no. I don't think any communists are Trump guys.
I think ultimately this administration is going to be very different than Trump one.
Okay.
I think that then his first.
You guys as socialists, why do you care about birthright citizenship?
I think it'll be more different in the sense of it's more of a handout to the tech companies.
So
I'll answer that.
Hold on. I think we need to wait more than the 4 days it's been to talk about what deportations are going to look like. I think we need to talk about deportations.
I agree. I'm just saying it's going to be basically the Elon Musk administration is what I'm saying. It's going to be like the very pro-Silicon Valley
absolutely.
admin. That's what I think.
But I think that what's going to happen is there's going to be a very public showing of the deportation of these people in order to distract
from all the Indian guys going over. Yeah.
Well, even not only just that, but from like the one.
I'm being racist. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, but like the H-1B visas. Because
but it's a distraction. It's like, look, we're getting all these people, we're putting them in cages, we're really tough, pro-America, and then meanwhile it's gonna be like this for all the guys working for Facebook and Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, and then they're going to be working for less money. They're going to be working extra hours without being paid.
And they're going to be like, these guys aren't citizens. They make a lot of money. These guys make our companies the best money. They're the best. You already have your reasoning.
Right.
These are legal immigrants. They don't cause crime. They're peaceful.
But okay, what are you pulling this replacing illegals with H-1Bs argument?
They literally.
It's not a replacement. It's not a replacement.
We're replacing illegals with legals. That's all.
Right. But it's not even a replacement because it's not going to be in the same. Hold on, it's not going to be in the same sectors. It's not going to be in the same sectors.
No, agriculture versus high tech.
It's not going to be in construction. It's not going to be in agriculture. It's not going to be in.
Well, I'm saying if we kick the Mexican people out, like they're getting removed from whatever sectors.
But like there's also like so many other people. Like there's the Haitians that were coming through. They're going to make a big public show of every single immigrant that they fucking kick out, documented or undocumented.
Correct.
They're going to try their best to kick out anybody who's committed a crime or whatever, and what they're going to do is continue to bring in the H1.
And the media is going to go along with the whole kabuki theater. They're going to go along and look at how evil. Here's a camera showing Trump's so mean to the immigrants. He's so mean. He's so mean. They're going to go along with all these stories.
It really doesn't even come down. It really doesn't even.
I don't even think so because they are fucking glazing the fuck. I don't know if you've been watching MSNBC or anything like that, but they've been glazing the fuck out.
Wait, are they owned?
They've been glazing the
I
fuck
think
out
they're
of
doing that. I think they're doing that because it's trying to calm people down because they can't be
owned
hysterical.
by Amazon. Which is the news agency owned by Amazon?
Washington Post is owned by.
Yeah, they went like full Trump. I think they're trying to get their approval for their nuclear power plant thing that they want to build for their AI expansion.
It's also important to realize it really doesn't even come down to. It really doesn't even come.
This is the display of the fuck you of the worker because Donald Trump was running on the workers, they're so exploited and everything is so bad and I'm going to bring down the prices. And it's all because of these nasty little immigrants. And he's going to fucking deport everybody who's, been here for 20 years. And then he's just going to bring other guys over that are working in the tech sector. And they're going to be doing menial jobs that Americans can do without a college education because they can be paid less. They can work extra without, fighting for labor rights. Because
the big one is social mobility within the company.
All right, but that's the thing. That's the thing. The Republican Party.
It sets wages.
The Republican Party has long. The Republican Party has long
because
de-incentivized education.
Sorry, I just wanted to get Gabe. What was your? You didn't give me an answer on what you thought about the 1848 revolution in Germany.
I don't know.
Because you described post-1850 Germany as capitalist, but I think 1848 is a really good example of the bourgeois ascending both productively and politically.
I didn't describe it as capitalist. I said that industrialization globally started around 1850.
I thought you were confining it to Germany.
I'm just speaking in very broad strokes.
Yeah. I thought you were confining it just to Germany. Sorry about that.
Okay. I don't have very strong. Go ahead. Sorry. Anyway.
Just before we dive into something else, so there is Tech Bro and the MAGA Bros, right now in a coalition to get Trump, but potentially they are at odds. So if Trump was presented, either pick the Tech Bros or the MAGA. Who is Trump gonna go for?
He doesn't have to. They've already reconciled all that stuff. What are you talking about?
He can do both because MAGA just wants him to do little cultural things, and Tech Bros want them to do specific legislation. Let's do both.
Aren't they fighting about this immigrant stuff?
Tech Bros are going to win on that. Money is going to win on that.
That's the thing. That's the thing. He already has.
Care. I was talking to my family members that were all Trumpers, and
they do care as long as you have the video of how evil immigrants are on top. That's what I'm saying. If you show that, and then in the back door you're having people come in and work for cheap, they're probably going to be distracted by that.
But a lot of MAGA people already have the mentality that their kids are lazy or Americans are lazy. So they're kind of already on the track to agree with these kind of arguments that Tech Bros put out there. Right.
Yeah, but that's the thing is the Republican Party has largely de-incentivized further education outside of high school.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. Is I was talking to my dad about that, and he was like, well, it doesn't matter that those jobs and those job sectors are where this is going to if all of the people in America just go do construction and things like that. I'm like, that's crazy.
But and that's the thing is that people aren't going to be able to get those jobs because if they're going to be if all they're doing is going to be replacing the immigrants with another source of cheap labor, Americans aren't actually going to be gaining those jobs. They're just going to be giving you it's a scapegoat method. That's all it is a scapegoat method. Because
I think it's a little bit worse than the illegal immigrants because with illegal immigrants, like there's some people that are trying to get pathways to citizenship for these people. But
Right.
And this is 20 years and are still at the same company working the same job. It's insane.
This is why it really doesn't come down to immigration or birthright citizenship. What it comes down to is, yes, Democrats support immigration because of the cheap labor. They want immigrants so that they can use the cheap labor as a pool of labor so that you are always replaceable. At the same time, the Republicans are going against immigration because in the background behind it all, they have just now established the richest cabinet, the wealthiest cabinet in history. And they are directly tied to the tech bros' interest, to the corporate interest of Elon, of Bezos, right? And that's where they're going to be going, is as long as they can generate a profit, you hating on immigrants, you hating on black people, you hating on women in the workforce, that's all fine and dandy as long as they are making a profit.
Right. I mean, it's like, you don't think there was a bunch of racism when the Chinese coolies were making the railroads? Like,
yeah, there was. Yeah.
Kind of how it worked. And some of the racism was still, the thinking that they're taking our jobs.
Well, I thought they formed the workers' unions and stuff, and we're like some of the only ones that got elected. In California was an Irish one that was their party platform was like driving the Chinese out.
Yeah. But at the same time, you have the interests of capital, right? That were like, Chinese people are cheaper than Irish, right? Bring them over.
The general consensus.
Would you say that those movements, even though they are like racist movements, were actually socialist?
No, they weren't. That's an example of America's settler colonialist existence. Instead of looking at the coolies and like seeing solidarity with them, we did the whole whites only gimmick.
Right, and then all they did is get their jobs back, and the system continued.
Yeah. But they're still going to be played off each other. It's not like
right.
I think the Chinese Exclusion Act. I don't remember when it happened, but it wasn't because the fucking Irish wanted it. I guarantee that.
I thought it was the Working Men's Party in California that pushed it, but I might be wrong.
Well, the Chinese Exclusion Act, I think, was a national one. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think it was.
I think there's a general consensus that the population, that the American population, I feel like there's a general consensus the American population is coming to. That being that it's the realization, right, that there isn't this two-party system that we are always kind of presenting that there is. And that really, if there is two parties, it's more of a two-party dictatorship. And that's always been the case. But moreover, the fact that the Democrats, this election cycle failed on purpose, and they failed to address the concerns of their supporter base. At the same time, the party leadership itself actually is benefiting from the Republicans.
They actually attacked their own base during the campaign,
which is funny. Which is funny because I start asking yourself, why is this the case? It's because the party leadership of the Democrats, they benefit the most with the Republicans being in power.
Teamsters supported Trump this election. They're at his rally. That's the biggest union in the United States. Teamsters. Yeah.
I think we're seeing an overall kind of merge of the two parties' interest, because they're realizing now that they can both achieve their interest through a mutual exclusion.
What about?
Did you ask what about?
It's like carrot and stick, right? Carrot is H1B1, and the stick is going to be ICE. They're targeting different things.
That's it. And they always have been, right? You kind of have. You kind of have the Republican Party, who's always been like grounded in like this alt-right kind of purification of like a domestic purification of the nation, and the Democratic Party, which has always prioritized intervention in other countries and just overall the extraction of resources abroad. And these two interests coming together and working side by side is the very formation of, well, the centralization of the oligarchy.
You don't think Republicans have been for like extracting wealth from other countries?
Oh no, they
Like,
they are they
Bush.
are they are. It's just the fact that the Democrats have been more open about it, and they have actually been the ones that have done it the most.
I guess you'd have to be specific about what period.
What period?
Was the Korean War a Democratic president? I can't remember. I know the Vietnam War was. And
Well, Vietnam War. Look at Afghan, Iraq, right? Look at most of the.
I thought those were both Bush. Wait, what?
Well, Afghanistan was Bush, but when Obama came in office, he like made a big effort to kind of do this whole like, Iraq is bad. It was like this big thing of like, hey, the Republicans are dumb. They went to war with the wrong country. They went to war with Iraq. We should have went to war with Afghanistan, even though we kind of already did. And so they did this whole like, we're going to do a do-over. We're going to go like extra hard. We're going to send Jack Bauer to Afghanistan and use the special forces and fucking like triple and blah, 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 blah. And then, 15 years later, nothing happened. But they acted like we're going to get, bin Laden, and they did get him, but it was in Pakistan, which is funny.
But Ronald Reagan was like a huge interventionist as well, like during the 80s.
Yeah. I think both parties are just competing to say we can earn capital the most money. Like they're actually trying to debate and say like we have